The Galactic Empire did not arrive with fire in the sky or weapons blazing. They arrived with silence, inevitability, and arrogance. Their ships drifted into Earth's orbit like vultures, metallic predators poised against a prey they considered beneath them. Humanity had always been underestimated. The galaxy saw them as chaotic, unrefined, loud creatures who could never unite, who fought as much against each other as against their enemies. But the Empire made one fatal miscalculation. They believed they could take what they wanted from humans without consequence. They believed the price of theft would be silence. They did not understand that for humans, blood ties were not negotiable. On the northern fringes of a colony, 3 young girls were taken. They were not soldiers. They were not leaders. They were simply daughters, laughing only hours before in the safety of home. Imperial storm squads moved through the settlement with clinical efficiency, pushing aside resistance with precision fire and energy blades. The colonists shouted, resisted, bled, and fell. They were ignored, crushed beneath the weight of an empire that saw no value in individual life. For the soldiers, it was routine. A sweet. A harvest. Children loaded onto a transport, faces pale, eyes wide, cries muffled by the hum of containment fields. The ship rose into the sky and was gone, leaving behind burning roofs and shattered families most empires believed they could take and break without repercussion. They counted on fear. Fear was the tool that chained worlds. Fear was the reason countless species lay docile under imperial boots. But humanity had never been guided by fear. Grief, rage, defiance, those were their currencies. And when grief and rage burned inside the wrong person, the galaxy learned what kind of monsters humans could become. The abduction did not go unnoticed. The news carried quickly through smuggler channels, mercenary whispers, resistance bands. And every whisper carried a name. Baba Yaga. The name was not official. It was never spoken in the Empire's records. But soldiers in dark outposts muttered it when they drank, intelligence officers exchanged glances when the name surfaced in intercepted transmissions, mercenaries swore they'd never take contracts against her. She was a ghost, a myth, a story told to explain slaughtered squads and vanished fleets. Humans called her an operator, a survivor of wars the galaxy had never catalogued. Aliens called her a witch. But all understood one truth: when the name Baba Yaga surfaced, death followed. She had once been human like any other, flesh and blood, bound by laws and oaths. She had fought in wars, had bled in forgotten jungles and frozen wastelands, had carved her legend in operations the galaxy never recorded. And then she vanished. No one knew why. Some said she had grown tired of war. Some said she was hunted and forced into hiding. The truth was simpler. She had found something worth more than fighting. She had daughters. She had laid her weapons aside to give them peace. But peace had been stolen. When word reached her of the abduction, something in her shifted. 4 years she had walked as a shadow of who she once was, content to disappear. But with the loss of her girls, the shadow gave way to fire. The part of her the galaxy had feared was not dead. It had only been sleeping. And now it was awake. The Empire thought it had taken 3 helpless children. What it had taken was her blood. And for that crime, she would bring ruin. She was not alone in her wrath. Beside her was a creature, small to the untrained eye, yet infamous on Earth for its defiance of reason itself. The honey badger. It was not an ordinary animal. Generations of breeding, genetic splicing, and harsh training had turned it into something more. Its instincts were raw violence, its body a compact engine of destruction. Every predator feared it. Every prey envied its endurance. It had no sense of retreat. No sense of defeat. Plasma fire, blades, venom, traps, it ignored them all in the single-minded pursuit of tearing apart whatever stood before it. Baba Yaga called it her partner. The galaxy would come to know it as her executioner. The Empire laughed when they first heard rumors of her moving. Soldiers mocked the stories. Commanders dismissed the chatter. A woman and a beast meant nothing against dreadnoughts and legions. Yet beneath the arrogance, unease began to spread. Reports of stockpiles of weapons disappearing, of patrols vanishing without a trace, of signals cut off mid-scream. And in every whispered rumor, one detail remained the same: her oath. She would tear apart the stars if needed, one ship at a time, until she found her daughters. The galaxy had always feared humanity's capacity for violence, but it had dismissed it as undisciplined chaos. What it did not understand was the deeper truth: violence, for humans, was not random. It was adaptive. It was personal. Humans fought for reasons other species could not comprehend. For territory, for survival, for freedom, but most of all for family. A threat to blood was a threat that no human would forgive. And Baba Yaga was not an ordinary human. She was the embodiment of that principle. The first warnings came from smugglers who claimed to have seen her move through black markets, acquiring old war gear with quiet precision. She paid not with money, but with promises, threats, and favors that carried the weight of inevitability. Weapons once thought useless were reforged into instruments of slaughter. Scrap metal became mines. Chemicals became poisons. Every fragment of trash became a weapon in her hands. She needed no fleet. She needed no army. She was an army. The Empire's arrogance was its undoing. They dismissed her as one more rebel, a problem to be crushed when convenient. They failed to realize what was rising against them. The abducted daughters were not simply children. They were the trigger that pulled humanity's darkest instincts into the light. The Empire had dealt with human soldiers, with human colonies, with human diplomacy. But it had never dealt with one human mother who swore vengeance, and so the whispers grew. Mercenary captains abandoned imperial contracts, unwilling to hunt a woman whose legend included entire crews butchered in silence. Alien prisoners began to mutter prayers to her name, believing she was more than mortal. Imperial officers scoffed in public but carried unease in private. Every soldier understood that death was part of war. But the kind of death she brought was different. It was personal. It was intimate. She did not kill because she had to. She killed because someone had taken from her, and she would not stop until balance was restored, when her preparations were complete, when her partner snarled at her side and the first blood had been spilled. She sent a single message across the void. It was not a demand. It was not a threat. It was a statement. They had taken her 3 girls. And she was coming for them. The galaxy that had once dismissed humanity as loud and reckless finally began to understand. Loudness was not the danger. Recklessness was not the threat. The true terror of humanity lay in the cold, calculated wrath of a single human who had been wronged, and as she moved into the darkness of space, shadows following, whispers echoing, the Empire felt the first chill of fear. Not of armies. Not of fleets. But of a story they had dismissed as myth. Baba Yaga was awake. And with her walked the killer honey badger. Together they were not soldiers. They were extinction wrapped in flesh. And the galaxy had no idea what storm had just been unleashed. The day came when silence broke. 4 months humanity endured mockery, endured the parading of their children in imperial custody, endured the empty promises of the Galactic Council. 4 months, they clung to patience, to civility, to the hope that words could reclaim what had been stolen. But when patience yielded nothing but scorn, when civility was met with laughter, humanity made a decision that would alter the course of history. The Terran Council stood united, a rare moment where every faction, every colony, every voice agreed. There would be no more negotiations. No more appeals to law or to reason. Civilization, as the Empire defined it, had failed. The time had come to fight as only deathworlders could fight. Humanity cast aside the mask and revealed the predator beneath. The first signs were subtle. Small patrols of imperial ships began disappearing. Outposts along the borders went dark. Supply convoys reported raids executed with uncanny precision. At first, the Empire dismissed these as isolated acts of piracy, the work of desperate colonists lashing out. But the truth was larger, more deliberate, more terrifying. Humanity had activated every resource, every colony, every hidden project. Every mine became a weapons forge. Every research facility turned its focus toward war. Civilian engineers and scientists who once designed life support systems and terraforming engines now poured their genius into creating tools of destruction. Deathworld ingenuity is unlike that of any other species. To others, a weapon is a device with a singular purpose. To humans, everything can become a weapon. Mining lasers were converted into ship-mounted cutters capable of slicing through hulls. Terraforming drones were repurposed into swarms of kamikaze strike craft. Medical nanites designed to heal wounds were reprogrammed to corrode enemy systems from within. Even simple agricultural machines were re-engineered into armored vehicles of war. The Empire could not comprehend such adaptability. Their doctrine relied on order, specialization, predictability. Humanity thrived in chaos, in improvisation, in turning the impossible into necessity. When the first coordinated strikes came, they were not against military strongholds but against the arteries of the Empire, its logistics, its communication networks, its fragile chains of dependency. Imperial fleets that expected open battle found themselves chasing shadows, responding to fires that spread faster than they could contain. A convoy would be ambushed, its escorts bypassed with cunning rather than brute strength. A fuel depot would erupt into flames, its safety systems overridden by human hackers who had studied Imperial code with relentless obsession. Orbital defenses meant to repel massive assaults were rendered useless when humans slipped past them in small, jury-rigged ships built for speed and maneuver rather than show of force. The Empire called it terrorism. Humanity called it justice. For every broadcast of children in Imperial custody, humanity answered with another strike. For every sneer, another convoy burned. For every dismissal, another world shook under sudden attack. The psychological war was as important as the physical one. Humans broadcast their victories, not with pride, but with grim declarations. You took our children. Now we take everything. These words echoed across star systems, spreading fear among Imperial citizens who had been assured of their rulers' invincibility. For the first time in centuries, the Empire looked fragile. The woman whose words had sparked humanity's fury reappeared. No longer merely a grieving mother, she had become the face of resistance. Across the stars, her voice carried, "You believed we would bow. You believed we would beg. Instead, we build. Instead, we fight. And we will not stop until every child is returned and every throne of yours lies in ruin." She spoke not as a politician or soldier but as a symbol of the primal bond that no empire could sever. Her words were not commands but calls to action, and billions answered. Imperial commanders soon discovered that the rules of war they clung to no longer applied. Human fleets did not fight in formation. They did not announce battles or follow predictable strategies. They struck where they were least expected, disappeared into asteroid fields, reappeared light years away, and struck again. A mining vessel could be a warship in disguise. A medical frigate might unleash electronic warfare that crippled entire armadas. A transport could conceal thousands of drones waiting to erupt like a storm. Even more terrifying than the weapons were the humans themselves. Imperial troops who boarded captured vessels spoke of horrors, humans fighting with a ferocity that bordered on madness. Even unarmed, they turned pipes into spears, cables into garrotes, their own bodies into weapons. Deathworld physiology made them stronger, faster, and far more resilient than most species. Where others would surrender, humans fought to the last breath. Stories spread of entire boarding parties wiped out by crews that should have been helpless. Whispers traveled through the Empire's ranks. The humans are no longer civilized. Fear took root. Imperial soldiers hesitated when orders came to engage. Merchants began refusing to travel through human sectors. Border colonies, once loyal to the Empire, began questioning their allegiance. Rebellion simmered, fueled by the knowledge that the Terrans, once considered the weakest, were openly defying the strongest power in the galaxy and winning. The Empire responded with brutality. Worlds suspected of aiding humans were bombarded. Prison camps overflowed with suspected sympathizers. Propaganda intensified, painting humans as monsters, savages, destroyers of order. Yet the more they condemned humanity, the more their own citizens wondered why such primitive creatures could bring the empire to its knees. Fear shifted to doubt, and doubt eroded obedience. What unsettled the empire most was not humanity's victories but their relentlessness. Every loss only hardened them further. Every death became another reason to fight. They did not seek negotiation. They did not ask for terms. They sought only the return of their children and the downfall of those who had dared to steal them. It was a war of purpose, and nothing in the galaxy was more dangerous than humans with purpose. As months turned into years, the balance of power shifted. Human fleets, once small and improvised, grew stronger. Their tactics evolved, their technology advanced with terrifying speed. Engineers who had been forced to innovate under pressure discovered breakthroughs that rivaled centuries of imperial research. Weapons once considered theoretical became reality. Engines that pushed ships beyond safe limits became standard. Shields that bent physics itself were deployed on front lines. Humanity's desperation had become innovation, and their innovation had become superiority. The empire, once untouchable, now found itself besieged. Entire sectors fell silent, severed by human raids. Commanders begged for reinforcements, but the demands outweighed supply. The empire of order was unraveling under the assault of chaos. And at the center of it all stood the words spoken by one grieving mother, now etched into the soul of every human fighter. You took our children. Now we stop being civilized. For the first time, the galaxy began to believe those words. Aliens who had once dismissed humanity now watched in awe and fear. Species long oppressed by the empire saw in humanity's defiance a chance for their own freedom. Quietly, rebellions began to stir. Where humans struck, others followed. The fire spread, unstoppable, and yet, through all the victories, humanity's goal remained unchanged. This was not conquest for conquest's sake. It was not empire building. It was retribution, pure and focused. Every act of war was a step toward one purpose: to bring their children home. The empire's leaders, arrogant even in crisis, clung to denial. They told themselves humanity would tire, that the weight of war would crush them, that eventually they would collapse. But history had already proven the folly of such thoughts. Humanity did not collapse under pressure. Humanity thrived in it. Every hardship was fuel. Every obstacle, a challenge to be overcome. Every loss, a scar that hardened rather than weakened. By the time the empire realized the truth, it was too late. Civilization had fallen away from humanity, and what remained was something primal, unstoppable, and utterly beyond their control. Humanity was no longer pleading for their children's return. They were tearing apart the galaxy to take them back. And nothing, no fleet, no throne, no empire would stand in their way. The war had reached its crescendo. What began as scattered strikes had become a storm that consumed entire sectors. The Galactic Empire, once considered unshakable, now staggered under the weight of defeat after defeat. Human fleets, born of desperation and hardened by relentless struggle, carved deeper into enemy territory than anyone thought possible. Where once the empire dictated terms, it now scrambled to defend its borders. Worlds that had long lived in the shadow of imperial dominance began to rise, emboldened by the sight of humans doing the unthinkable. In the heart of the conflict lay humanity's singular goal: the return of their stolen children. Every battle, every raid, every sacrifice led toward this purpose. They had not forgotten, and they had not wavered. Intelligence gathered from liberated colonies and captured officers pointed to a single truth: the children had been taken to indoctrination academies, hidden deep within imperial space. It was there that the empire had tried to mold them into loyal subjects, erasing their heritage, replacing it with obedience. Yet what the empire had failed to understand was that humanity's spirit is not so easily extinguished. When Terran strike teams finally breached the first academy, they did not find broken, submissive children. They found defiance. The young had resisted in every way they could, from refusing imperial oaths to sabotaging equipment, from teaching each other forbidden Terran songs to carving messages of hope into the walls. Even in captivity, even under indoctrination, the children carried within them the same spark that drove their parents to war. When the rescuers arrived, they were met not with hollow stares but with fierce, unyielding eyes. Survival itself had been their rebellion. The reunions were not quiet. Across the stars, broadcasts showed children running into the arms of their parents, soldiers kneeling in tears as they held the lives they had fought so long to save. Humanity rejoiced, but their joy was not gentle, it was sharpened by fury. For though their children were returned, the crime itself demanded reckoning. The Empire had sought to erase a people, and for that, there would be no forgiveness. The war did not end with the rescues. In many ways, it had only begun. With their purpose vindicated, humanity no longer fought from desperation but from momentum. Their fleets surged further, pressing into the Empire's core worlds. The very heart of imperial power, once thought unreachable, now lay vulnerable. Human commanders made their strategy clear. Not only would they dismantle the Empire's military, they would tear out its roots, its economy, its ruling class, its very sense of invincibility. One by one, bastions that had stood for centuries fell. Palaces burned. Shipyards collapsed into molten ruin. Entire fleets surrendered, unwilling to face the merciless advance. Each victory carried with it not just human triumph but the rising tide of rebellion from other species. For centuries, the Empire had ruled through fear, but humanity proved that fear could be broken. Worlds long enslaved rose in revolt, taking up arms alongside the Terrans. The Empire, once the master of countless races, now found itself surrounded by enemies it had created. The woman who had first spoken the words that ignited this war stood once more before humanity, but this time, her words were not pleas. They were judgment. Addressing the galaxy, she declared, civilization is not crowns and thrones. It is not banners and decrees. Civilization is the promise that children are safe in their parents' arms. The Empire shattered that promise. And so, we shattered the Empire. Her message was not one of conquest but of reckoning, a reminder that humanity had not chosen war for expansion but for survival and for justice. Yet her words carried a warning: if ever again hands are raised to steal what is ours, we will return. And we will not stop until nothing of you remains. The trials that followed were swift. Captured imperial leaders were brought before tribunals, not in ornate courts but in the ruins of their own citadels. They were shown the faces of the children they had stolen, the scars of those they had tried to indoctrinate, and the graves of those who had not survived. Their pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears. Judgment was delivered not with cruelty but with finality. Some were executed, their legacies erased in fire. Others were exiled, cast into the void with no fleets and no crowns. A few were left alive, broken, as symbols of what happens when arrogance blinds rulers to the power of those they oppress. The Empire collapsed, not with a single blow, but with the weight of 1,000 small defeats, each one delivered by hands that refused to yield. Humanity did not crown itself an empire in its place. Instead, they built something different. The liberated worlds looked to them not as conquerors but as allies. A new coalition rose, bound not by domination but by the shared knowledge that freedom had been won by those who would not kneel. Humanity, once marked as barbarians, now stood at the center of a new order, one built on the unshakable truth that no empire, however vast, could ever break their spirit, but humanity did not allow its allies to mistake mercy for weakness. The lesson of the war was clear, and they made certain it would never be forgotten. Across the galaxy, monuments were raised, not to victories or generals, but to children. At their bases, engraved in 12 languages, were the same words spoken at the beginning: "You took our children. Now we stop being civilized." It was not only a reminder of the past but a warning for the future. Any who dared threaten the sanctity of humanity's survival would face the same relentless storm. The galaxy, once certain of its order, now looked at humanity with awe and fear. Species that had dismissed them as dangerous anomalies now recognized them as the very embodiment of resilience. Rulers who had once sneered at Terrans now treated them with deference, knowing that beneath the veneer of diplomacy lay a power that would never again be underestimated. Even those who had once been complicit in the Empire's crimes now tread carefully, aware that humanity's memory was long and its patience finite. The children who had been rescued grew, carrying within them the legacy of survival and defiance. They became leaders, explorers, warriors, and builders of a future that would never again be dictated by fear of others. Their voices carried forward the memory of captivity, ensuring that no generation would forget why their people had chosen war. They were the living proof that even in the darkest of prisons, the human spirit could not be broken, and so the reckoning was complete. The empire was gone, humanity was ascendant, and the galaxy would never again look at deathworlders with the same disdain. They were no longer the species tolerated on the edges of civilization. They were civilization's new measure, its unbreakable foundation, its most terrifying guardian. The final message that humanity sent into the void was not one of triumph, but of warning. We tried peace. We tried patience. We tried to be civilized. You taught us the cost of restraint. Know this: never again will our children be touched, never again will our people be stolen, and never again will we allow ourselves to bow. Remember, when you gaze upon the stars, we are there, watching. And if you forget this truth, we will remind you. The galaxy listened, and for the first time in centuries, it trembled. For it understood that a line had been drawn, and on that line stood humanity. They had been provoked, they had been underestimated, and they had answered with a fury that reshaped the cosmos. And though the fires of war faded, the memory of what they had unleashed remained etched into the stars themselves. Thus ended the age of the Galactic Empire, and thus began the age of humanity, not because they sought it, but because they were forced to reveal what lay beneath their servility. They had shown the galaxy the price of arrogance, and the lesson would echo for as long as stars burned. Never take their children, never mistake their patience for weakness, never forget what happens when humanity stops being civilized.